Dear listener, welcome to the second story in the adventures of Sherlock Holmes, the Red-Headed League. This is one of the most delightfully bizarre and cleverly constructed tales in the entire canon. It begins with an absurd advertisement offering easy money to red-headed men and spirals into a masterful criminal plot involving disguise, patience, and a daring bank robbery. Narrated by the loyal Dr. John H. Watson, the story showcases Sherlock Holmes at his finest. His extraordinary powers of observation and deduction, his love for the unusual, and his ability to see through the most outlandish scheme to the simple truth beneath. From the quiet autumn day in Baker Street to the dark tunnels beneath a London bank, every peculiar detail, every sharp deduction, every moment of Holmes's quiet triumph, and every twist will unfold here in rich, vivid detail. Nothing important is left untold. Settle in as the scarlet thread of this curious league is unraveled thread by thread. The game is most decidedly afoot. Watson's arrival and first impressions. It was a crisp autumn day in the year 1890 when I, Dr. John H. Watson, called upon my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes at his rooms in Baker Street. I found him deep in conversation with a very stout, florid-faced elderly gentleman with fiery red hair. The man had the appearance of an average commonplace British tradesman, obese, pompous, and slow. He wore baggy gray shepherd's check trousers, a not over-clean black frock coat unbuttoned in the front, a drab waistcoat with a heavy brass Albert chain, and a square-pierced bit of metal dangling as an ornament. Nothing about him seemed remarkable except his blazing red head and the look of profound perplexity on his face. Holmes greeted me warmly and insisted I stay. "You could not possibly have come at a better time, my dear Watson," he said. Turning to his visitor, he continued, "This gentleman, Mr. Jabez Wilson, has been good enough to call upon me this morning and to begin a narrative which promises to be one of the most singular which I have listened to for some time. You have heard me remark that the strangest and most unique things are very often connected not with the larger, but with the smaller crimes, and occasionally, indeed, where there is room for doubt whether any positive crime has been committed. As far as I have heard, it is impossible for me to say whether the present case is an instance of crime or not, but the course of events is certainly among the most singular that I have ever listened to." Holmes then asked Mr. Wilson to begin his story again from the beginning for my benefit, adding that he found the details not only curious but potentially instructive. Wilson cleared his throat and launched into his extraordinary tale. Jabez Wilson's story, the advertisement, and the league. Mr. Jabez Wilson explained that he was a pawnbroker with a small but respectable business at 17 King Edward Street, near Saxe-Coburg Square. His business had been modest for some years, and he employed only one assistant, a young man named Vincent Spaulding, who was willing to work for half wages just to learn the trade. Spaulding was a small, stout-built, very quick, and intelligent fellow with no facial hair, though he was certainly over 30. He had one notable physical peculiarity, a white splash of acid upon his forehead. One morning, about 8 weeks earlier, Spaulding rushed into the shop waving a newspaper. "I wish to the Lord, Mr. Wilson," he cried, "that I was a red-headed man." When Wilson asked why, Spaulding pointed to an advertisement in the Morning Chronicle. It read, "The Red-Headed League, a vacancy has arisen in the league for a red-headed man. All red-headed men who are sound in body and mind and above the age of 21 years are eligible. Apply in person on Monday at 11 o'clock to Duncan Ross at the offices of the league, 7 Pope's Court, Fleet Street." Spaulding explained that the league had been founded by the eccentric American millionaire Ezekiah Hopkins, who was himself red-headed and wished to provide easy berths for men with red hair. The pay was £4 a week for purely nominal services. Wilson, whose own hair was a vivid fiery red, was skeptical but intrigued, especially as his business was not overly busy. Spaulding encouraged him strongly, saying it was a rare opportunity worth far more than the salary. The next Monday, Wilson and Spaulding joined a long queue of red-headed men stretching down Fleet Street and around the corner. The competition was fierce, but after much pushing and waiting, Wilson was shown into an inner office. There sat Duncan Ross, a small, stout man with an even brighter red head than Wilson's. Ross examined Wilson's hair closely, pulled it to ensure it was genuine, and declared him eligible. He explained the duties. Wilson must copy out the Encyclopedia Britannica from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock each day in the league's office. He must not leave the building during those hours for any reason. The salary would be paid weekly. If he broke the rules, he would forfeit the position forever. Wilson accepted at once. For the next 8 weeks, he arrived promptly each morning, copied diligently, reaching the letter A by the end, and received his £4 every Saturday. The work was monotonous but easy, and the money helped his struggling business. Spaulding managed the pawnshop alone during those hours and seemed perfectly content. The sudden dissolution, then came the shocking end. On the morning of the day Wilson visited Holmes, he arrived at Pope's Court as usual at 10 o'clock only to find a handwritten notice pinned to the door. The Red-Headed League is dissolved. October 9, 1890. Wilson was stunned. He knocked, inquired with neighbors, and even visited the landlord, but no one knew anything about Duncan Ross or the League. The office had been rented only temporarily. The entire organization seemed to have vanished overnight. Deeply puzzled and angry at losing his easy income, Wilson turned to Sherlock Holmes for help. He had come not so much for the money, though it was welcome, but because the whole affair was so extraordinarily strange. What was the object of this singular league, he asked, and why should they choose me? Holmes's immediate interest and deductions. Holmes listened with rapt attention, his eyes half closed, fingertips together in his characteristic pose. When Wilson finished, Holmes asked a series of sharp questions. How long had Spaulding been with him? What did he look like in detail? Did he have pierced ears? Had Wilson noticed anything unusual about the cellar of the pawnshop? Wilson described Spaulding as quick, clean-shaven, with a white acid splash on his forehead and pierced ears for earrings in his younger days. Holmes's eyes sparkled with excitement. "It is quite a three-pipe problem," he remarked to Watson, "and I beg that you won't speak to me for 50 minutes. He lit his pipe and sat in silence, lost in thought. After some time, Holmes sprang to his feet. "Spaulding is clearly a man with a criminal past," he declared. "The Red-Headed League was a clever ruse to get you out of your shop for several hours each day." He asked Wilson to show them the way to Saxe-Coburg Square at once. On the way, Holmes made several keen observations about the streets and buildings they passed, mapping the area in his mind. The visit to Saxe-Coburg Square and the pawnshop, they reached the quiet, shabby square where Wilson's pawnshop stood. Holmes walked slowly along the pavement, tapping the ground with his stick and studying the buildings with intense concentration. He paid particular attention to the pavement in front of the shop and the adjacent properties. Then he knocked on the door. Vincent Spaulding answered, a small, stout man with a clean-shaven face, a white splash of acid on his forehead, and an air of quiet intelligence. Holmes asked for directions to the Strand, but his real purpose was to study Spaulding's knees. After the brief exchange, Holmes turned to Watson with quiet triumph. "I have seen all I wished to see," he said. The knees of his trousers were worn, wrinkled, and stained, exactly as one would expect from hours of kneeling and digging. Holmes then revealed his suspicion. A daring crime was being planned right beneath their feet. He warned that they must act that very night. The evening stakeout and the capture that evening. Holmes, Watson, Inspector Peter Jones of Scotland Yard, and Mr. Merriweather, a director of the City and Suburban Bank, met near the bank. Holmes explained the full scheme. The Red-Headed League had been invented by the notorious criminal John Clay, also known as Vincent Spaulding, and his accomplice to keep Wilson away from his shop while they tunneled from the pawnshop cellar into the bank's strongroom, which contained a large quantity of French gold. The tunnel was nearly complete. They waited in darkness inside the bank cellar. At around 10 o'clock, they heard faint sounds of digging. Suddenly, a section of the stone floor gave way, and a man emerged, John Clay himself, with a lantern and a revolver. Holmes and the others sprang forward. After a brief struggle, Clay and his accomplice were arrested. Clay surrendered with cool arrogance, saying, "I beg that you will not touch me with your filthy hands." Holmes explains the solution back at Baker Street. Holmes explained every step of his reasoning with characteristic clarity. The advertisement and the League were absurd on the surface, but the more bizarre a thing is, the less mysterious it proves to be. Spaulding's eagerness for half wages, his time in the cellar, the worn knees of his trousers, the acid splash from counterfeiting work, and the sudden dissolution of the League all pointed to one thing: a tunnel being dug to a nearby bank. Holmes had confirmed the direction by observing the streets and the pavement. As a rule, Holmes remarked, the more bizarre a thing is, the less mysterious it proves to be. It is your commonplace, featureless crimes which are really puzzling. He added that the case had provided him with an amusing little problem to escape the commonplaces of existence. My life is spent in one long effort to escape from the commonplaces of existence. These little problems help me to do so. Closing narration. And so concluded the curious affair of the Red-Headed League. Jabez Wilson returned to his pawnshop wiser, if somewhat poorer in experience. John Clay, one of the cleverest criminals in London, was safely in custody, his elaborate scheme foiled by Holmes's brilliant observation and reasoning. Watson reflected once more on his friend's extraordinary mind, a mind that could turn the most ridiculous advertisement into the key to preventing a major crime. If your pulse quickened at the absurdity of the league, your mind raced with Holmes's deductions, and you smiled at the final arrest in the bank cellar, then Sir Arthur Conan Doyle has once again woven a perfect blend of humor, mystery, and masterful detection. The red hair may fade from memory, but the cleverness of this adventure will linger long. The game, dear listener, is always afoot, and sometimes the strangest paths lead straight to the truth.